Breaking. United States launches strike near Venezuela's east coast as tensions spike.
2:11 a.m. local time, Eastern Caribbean. The night over the Caribbean was silent. No storms, no traffic changes, no warning signs. Then a single track appeared on a United States Navy radar screen. High altitude, extreme speed, straight line, no deviation. The operator froze. This was not commercial, not friendly, not lost. The contact was moving above 40,000 feet, faster than 600 miles per hour, heading toward Venezuela's eastern coastal zone. No radio calls, no identification, no course correction. This was not a patrol flight. At that same moment, far beyond visual range, a long-range United States aircraft was already in position. Its route did not point towards cities or people. It pointed towards systems, radar sites, coastal control nodes, the eyes and ears of the defense network. Inside the aircraft, the mood was calm. Checklists were finished. Weapons systems were ready. No one was asking questions because every decision had already been approved long before takeoff. On the ground, Venezuelan radar stations stayed active. Screens glowed. Antennas kept sweeping. Commanders chose not to power down. That choice changed everything. Out at sea, United States tasking orders shifted instantly. Monitoring ended. Execution began. Distances that once measured hours now measured minutes. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate move forward, taken with full knowledge that once it happened, it could not be undone quietly. And as that aircraft held its course through the dark Caribbean sky, one reality settled in for both sides. The night was no longer about tension. It was about what happens next. The eastern coastline of Venezuela was not chosen by accident. This stretch of coast sits near the edge of the Essequibo region, an area already under heavy political pressure and international attention. What makes it sensitive is not population, it is function. Along this coastline are radar stations, coastal command posts, fuel transfer points, and monitoring systems that watch both the sky and the sea. These systems do not fire weapons. They provide awareness. They give leaders time to decide. When they work, everything feels stable. When they fail, decisions collapse into minutes. From a strategic view, disrupting this zone sends a message far beyond Venezuela. It touches disputed waters, offshore energy routes, and regional security guarantees. It challenges the idea that distance and diplomacy alone can keep critical systems safe. But for the people working there, none of that mattered. Night shift operators were watching routine data. Guards followed familiar paths. Radios crackled with normal check-ins. Nothing felt unusual until screens began lagging and signals stopped behaving the way they always had. Commanders faced a choice with no safe answer. Shutting systems down meant giving up visibility. Keeping them active meant exposure. Either move carried risk, and hesitation itself could invite disaster. For United States planners, the weight was just as real. This was not about destruction. It was about pressure. Once applied, pressure cannot be quietly taken back. This is where the confrontation sharpened. One side believed it was defending sovereignty. The other believed it was enforcing deterrence. Neither side believed stepping back was an option. And in moments like this, the most dangerous thing is not action. It is belief. The first warning did not arrive as an explosion. It arrived as confusion. Along Venezuela's eastern coastline, radar operators noticed something was wrong. Tracks that had been cleaned seconds earlier began to stretch and split. One contact became two, then three. Speed numbers jumped, froze, then vanished. At first, crews treated it like a system problem. Screens were reset, power levels were checked, antennas were adjusted, no alarms sounded. No one panicked. This was still procedure. But the picture did not recover. Range numbers began collapsing too fast to make sense. Distances that should have taken minutes were shrinking in seconds. The returns were too clean, too consistent, too organized. One operator finally said what everyone was thinking. This isn't a glitch. Across the room, the same distortion spread to every console. Identification tags blinked off. Altitude data lagged behind reality. What the crews were seeing no longer matched training or past encounters. This was not one aircraft testing limits. This was pressure coming from multiple directions at the same time. While confusion grew on land, the view at sea was completely different. Inside a United States Navy command center, displays were stable and clear. Tracks were smooth. Timelines were already running. Nothing on those screens was a surprise. When final authorization came, it was calm. Moments later, the first cruise missile launched. Then another. Then another. Each one dropped low over the water, hugging the surface, turning inland along paths designed to stay unseen until the last possible moment. On American screens, their routes appeared clean and controlled. On shore, there was no clear picture at all. Venezuelan units scrambled to respond. Orders overlapped. Radar teams tried to separate real targets from false ones. Air defense crews rushed systems online, but the airspace was already saturated with signals they could not sort or trust. And in that moment, everyone understood the same thing. This confrontation had moved past warnings. If you think Venezuela miscalculated by keeping systems active, press 1. If you believe the United States pushed this moment on purpose, press 9 and subscribe, because the next phase changed everything. The damage did not end with the first wave. As power dropped along the coast, inland systems began failing one after another. Data links went dark. Control centers lost visibility. Energy operators no longer knew which facilities were still running and which were already offline. What had been a connected national network fractured into isolated pockets, each working blind. In one control room, engineers tried to reroute power manually. Screens refreshed, then froze. Backup generators engaged, but fuel levels were unknown. Phones rang without answers on the other end. Every update raised more questions than it solved. The real danger was speed. Facilities that took years to build were disrupted in minutes. Decisions that once had hours of buffer time now had seconds. There was no pause button, no reset. Along the coast, emergency crews struggled to move. Traffic lights were dead. Roads clogged with stalled vehicles. Fire units reached some sites, only to find water pressure too low to fight the flames. Others never made it at all. In nearby towns, people stepped outside into darkness. Power failed without warning. Cell service vanished. Radios filled with rumors. Families looked toward the coastline, watching an orange glow rise where steady industrial lights had always been. Hospitals switched to generators and began rationing power. Non-essential procedures were stopped. Administrators checked fuel supplies again and again, knowing resupply might not come soon. From above, United States surveillance platforms tracked the cascade in real time. Heat signatures confirmed secondary fires. Infrastructure nodes were marked degraded, then non-functional. No new targets were added. The sequence had already done its work. On the Venezuelan side, reports reached command in fragments. Some units confirmed direct hits. Others reported total silence from neighboring sites. No one had a complete picture. And without a complete picture, every response carried risk. This was the point of no return. Not because buildings were burning, but because once essential systems fail in layers, recovery becomes slower than collapse. Control slips away quietly, replaced by reaction and uncertainty. The night stopped being about military pressure. It became about national stability. If you think Venezuela underestimated how exposed its infrastructure really was, press 1. If you believe the United States intended to force this moment from the start, press 9 and subscribe, because the next phase moved from damage to decision. Minutes after the strikes were confirmed, Venezuela's military command network shifted into full emergency mode. Inside an inland command facility, officers gathered around screens filled with gaps. Some data feeds were still live, others were frozen at the exact second coastal power failed. Maps refreshed unevenly, showing confirmed impact zones surrounded by growing silence. Orders went out fast. Mobile radar units were told to relocate. Air defense batteries changed operating modes. Fighter squadrons were placed on alert, engines warming on dark runways as crews waited for direction. The problem was not speed, it was uncertainty. Commanders could not tell if the strikes were finished or only paused. Was this a limited signal or the opening of something much larger? Every decision depended on that answer, and no one in the room had it. Shutting systems down might protect what remained. Keeping them active risked follow-on strikes. Launching aircraft could show resolve or trigger escalation. Doing nothing risked appearing weak. Along the coast, surviving radar teams struggled to rebuild a usable air picture. Signals overlapped. False contacts appeared, then vanished. Each new report contradicted the last. At sea, United States forces held position. Ships did not advance. Aircraft stayed outside defended airspace. To Venezuelan commanders, that restraint felt deliberate and unsettling, as if the pause itself was part of the message. Civil authorities began demanding answers. Energy officials reported failures spreading inland. Fuel distribution slowed, then stopped. Hospitals called for updates that never arrived. This was no longer just a military crisis. It was touching daily life. Inside the command room, the focus shifted from response to perception. How much action showed control? How much restraint invited more pressure? One wrong move could turn damage into disaster. An officer finally said it out loud. "We are no longer reacting to the strike. We are reacting to what comes next." If you think Venezuela had no good options left, press 1. If you believe the United States designed this pause to force mistakes, press 9 and subscribe, because the next phase moved into the air. Just before dawn, the pressure moved upward. At an inland Venezuelan airbase, alert crews received the order they had been waiting for all night. 2 fighters rolled onto the runway under dim lights, engines rising in pitch as ground crews pulled clear. Within seconds, the jets lifted into the dark sky and turned east toward the coast. On paper, the mission was simple. Identify any incoming air activity. Show presence. Protect what remained. In reality, nothing about the situation was simple anymore. As the fighters climbed, radar controllers tried to guide them. The picture kept shifting. Some tracks appeared solid, then faded. Others jumped position without explanation. Controllers issued heading changes, then corrected those corrections moments later. Over the Caribbean, United States aircraft were already in position. They stayed outside, defended airspace, holding steady orbits at altitude. They did not advance. They did not retreat. That restraint created pressure of its own. As the Venezuelan fighters closed distance, ranges collapsed faster than expected. Numbers dropped from dozens of miles to single digits in minutes. Pilots adjusted course, unsure whether they were approaching an aircraft or a false return. For a brief moment, both sides occupied the same volume of sky. No radar locks were declared. No warnings were transmitted. Yet, every pilot involved understood how little time remained for error. Inside command centers, posture tightened. One misread signal, one aggressive turn, one delayed instruction could turn pressure into open combat. Then, just as quickly as it built, the moment eased. The Venezuelan fighters altered course, holding distance. United States aircraft maintained their pattern, neither pressing nor withdrawing. The immediate danger passed, but the threshold had been tested. If you think Venezuela was right to scramble fighters, press 1. If you believe the United States forced this moment on purpose, press 9 and subscribe, because the final decision did not happen in the air. By morning, the fires were still burning, but the real impact had already settled in. What happened overnight was not just a strike, not just a radar failure, and not just a tense moment in the air. It was a message delivered in stages. First came confusion, then disruption, then restraint. Each step was meant to be seen, measured, and understood. For Venezuela's leadership, the lesson was blunt. Distance no longer guaranteed safety. Keeping systems online no longer meant control. Every choice made under pressure was now being watched, not just by the United States, but by the entire region. For the United States, the operation drew a hard line without crossing fully into open war. Force was applied, then deliberately paused. That pause mattered. It shifted responsibility away from weapons and toward decision makers. What happened next would depend on judgment, not firepower. Across the Caribbean, allies and rivals took note, not of public statements, but of timing, of restraint, of how quickly modern systems can be disrupted without occupying a single mile of ground. For civilians, the night changed something deeper. When power fails without warning and skies fill with unseen threats, conflict stops feeling distant. It becomes personal. it becomes real. By sunrise, the crisis had not ended. It had stabilized, at least for now. And history shows that when lines are tested and left standing, they are rarely left alone for long.